Barbarians rush in where other Dungeons and Dragons classes fear to tread. They embody raw, feral power, primal curiosity, and sheer, indomitable strength. Do you feel like charging in, swinging a huge frickin' weapon around the battlefield? How about intimidating your enemies with your swole physique, which everybody can see, of course, because you're not bothering with bulky armor. Don't worry, you just shrug off damage because you are that tough and so incredibly angry. Let's build a character sheet for a D&D Barbarian so you can get playing and embrace the rage. I am Ryan Doyle, and welcome to the Verdigris Table, everybody. And I do mean everybody. There's never been more people from more places and more walks of life playing Dungeons and Dragons than today, and I love it. Please, please, please take a second to let me know in the comments where you're from and what level of experience you have with D&D and other tabletop role-playing games. And if you have zero experience in this hobby, that's all right. In fact, I love helping new folks get involved in this game. We are going to keep things in this how-to character creation tutorial, super beginner friendly, so don't worry, I got you. Now up top, I do have to tell you that this video is sponsored by Into the AM. They make great, comfortable clothing like this awesome shirt I'm wearing right now. They make all sorts of great stuff, but I am partial to the graphic tees because of all of their beautiful designs. If you're looking to elevate your wardrobe, using my affiliate link is a great way to help support the channel, save yourself some money, and look good doing it. For this video, we're only working out of the 2024 Players Handbook, which is like the baseline for the latest edition of Dungeons and Dragons. You might hear 5th edition revised or 5e24 or 5.5. It's complicated, and don't worry about it. At the time of this recording, if you sit down with people to play D&D, the odds are better than 9 out of 10, closer to 99 out of 100, that this is what they're using. If you're out there wondering how to get started in the game, the Player's Handbook, or PHB, is the first thing you should pick up. I got this fancy alternative cover down at my friendly local neighborhood game shop, but if that's not an option for you, I've also got an affiliate link down below where you can get your hands on this book for the lowest price around. Now, I am partial to having a good physical book, can you tell? But for this video, we're going to be using the official online tool set on DNDBeyond because it makes things easier on you, especially in the process of showing you. I have purchased the digital PHB on there as well, and while I feel strongly that it's better to have something you actually own, that you don't even have to worry about Wi-Fi access to use, that can't be altered by somebody else whenever they feel like it, there are arguments for making your first purchase of the PHB on D&D Beyond. I'll tell you right now, a lot of us nerds just end up buying it both ways. Okay, let's jump into character creation and make our Barbarian. Now, if you're interested in the fastest way to go about it, pre-made is your answer there. And there are some good options under this. You can click on pre-made, go find yourself a Barbarian, and be playing in minutes. But this video, we're building our own baby. So we're using standard. We're going to load up right away. We get the option to put a name, Tarakan. Obviously, you can go in here and type whatever you like. We can also go select what kind of portrait, what kind of profile pic do we want for this Barbarian. Now, I already have a pretty good idea of what we're building in mind. We're building this lovely lady right from the PHB. She's a stone giant, Goliath, by my estimation. And she's wielding a great axe. And yeah, she's just looking pretty awesome. So I'm going to do my best to emulate what I think when I see her. So we're not going to go super deep on this first page because it can get a little complicated. But to keep things simple, I'm going to tell you, just uncheck all these boxes. Homebrew is make your own rules and or character options. Expanded rules come from other supplements. The 2014 core rules is basically the older rule set, and then Legacy is a junk drawer of all sorts of stuff. Your dungeon master will tell you whether or not any or all of this stuff is allowed. You're never going to show up not using it and be forced to use it, or let's say it's very rare. The same goes for partnered content. I suggest turn all of this off when in doubt. Not to say that this is not some of the best stuff in the Dungeons and Dragons ecosystem right now. Third-party products, for the most part here, bringing some awesome options for the world building, for the character design, but one, your dungeon master might not be prepared to balance encounters for characters built using these options. And also, maybe even more importantly, some of these might be thematically or tonally very different than what your game is going to embody. If I show up with a Rick and Morty character with a fart gun to a more traditional kind of Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones vibe table, there's going to be a mismatch there. So talk to your dungeon master, but shortcut, turn all of that off. We're going to leave dice rolling on. I'm not going to worry too much about optional class features and customizing your origin without a conversation with your dungeon master. Milestone is, I would say, the most popular type of advancement, the alternative being experience point calculations, which is a lot more math, and therefore other tables not necessarily using it as much. Point type is definitely more of a question here, but I don't think you can go wrong with fixed. Manual is when you roll for your hit points. That's a little more old school, a little more varied. Fixed is a little bit, it's one less thing to think about, first of all. And second of all, it keeps things balanced for newer dungeon masters. We're going to use prerequisites unless we're told not to. As you get more and more advanced, you're going to decide whether or not you like to show the leveled scaled spells or not on the character sheet. You're a barbarian, so right now this doesn't matter for us. Encumbrance we're probably not using at the vast majority of tables. If we are, cool, good for you, and actually double good for you, Barbarian, who is a giant kin, and we'll get to that in a little bit because you're going to be better off than anybody. But most games these days are not worrying about encumbrance, or they're using some variation, so that won't matter either. I'm a strong believer on modifiers on top. Your personal preference may vary, but the modifiers are what's going to matter and what you're going to want to see. The scores are just there to derive the modifier these days. Character privacy. Do you want people in your campaign to see your character? Probably, if you're using DNDBeyond to host the campaign, or your dungeon master is using DNDBeyond to host your campaign. Do you want it public so anyone can see? Do you want it private because it's your dark secret? Player's choice. All right, let's go to the next page and really get into this. All right, so our class is going to be by far the most defining feature of how our character plays, and we're picking it up top. We get a list of all of the stuff that's available to the Barbarian. It also shows here, and maybe a little more of a user-friendly visual format, so I'm going to focus on that. Right out of the gate, we're using a D12 for our hit die. That's the biggest thing. No one's rocking a D20. No one else is rocking a D12. We are getting the most hit points out of anybody from the gate. Barbarians are survival machines. There aren't necessarily tanks in the same way somebody coming from like an MMORPG background might think of a tank, but a barbarian is the closest approximation to that in a lot of ways. A frontline fighter that can soak up damage while the squishier, wizards and sorcerers are in the back throwing fireballs around. For our class features here, this is what we're really concerned about, and the ones with the blue exclamation points telling us we have some choices to make. Being a barbarian is going to give us 2 core barbarian skills. This also spells out, okay, strength is our primary ability. That's the thing we want to invest the most heavily in. Our ability score is strength. That's what's going to effectively determine our damage and a couple other things. Like I said, D12 per barbarian level for a hit point die. For our saving throw proficiencies, which are more defensive features, we get strength, which is okay. I mean, we're already naturally good at it if we're investing in strength, but we're going to get our proficiency bonus on strength saves, which don't come up a ton. and Constitution, which comes up quite a bit more often, especially if we're going to be a little more adventurous in trying out those random berries we find, or getting into drinking contests with dwarfs or goblins. Skill proficiencies is what we're down here to select, and we've got a couple options. I will tell you, barbarians are not the most skilled of classes. We are a very combat heavy force in the game, and that's cool. Weapon proficiencies, we are allowed to use, we are able to use simple and martial weapons, which is to say all of the kinds. For armor, we get light and medium and shields. Put a pin in that. Remember that shields are an option for us as a barbarian. A quick +2 bonus to our AC, our armor class, if we're willing to give up a hand to hold that shield. But we get light and medium armor available to us, not heavy, and that suits the class fantasy here. And don't worry, we mitigate damage quite a bit, so we don't necessarily miss that heavy armor. Eventually, we're probably going to end up in medium armor. You're going to want to save your shekels, your gold pieces, for some half plate down the road, or a breastplate maybe to start. And then starting equipment, we can either A, choose a great axe, 4 hand axes, an explorer's pack, and 15 gold pieces, or just take 75 gold pieces and go shopping in the PHB. I generally recommend, especially for newer players, take the prepackaged stuff. Don't worry about it. Don't spend a ton of time shopping, because you can do that later. Eventually, you're going to have more gold than you know what to do with in most games. All right, now for skills, barbarians, again, are not super skill monkey. We have animal handling, which is pretty situational. If it suits the kind of character you're building, cool, go for it. It's going to help your interaction with beasts, essentially. But again, that's not going to come up super often at most tables. I, for one, am going to tell you, lean into the story side of things more than the min-maxy efficiency side of things most of the time. But you also want to select things that are going to come up, that you're going to use. Especially, we get 2 skills, we want to make them count. The same kind of holds true for athletics. On one hand, we're going to be a strong character. We're going to be the one relied upon to come through doing athletic things, moving heavy stuff around, almost exclusively at this point in the game's evolution. Depends on your table. It depends on how your Dungeon Master's running thing. Your mileage may vary, but athletics also kind of situational. I'm going to recommend, at least strongly considering, if not absolutely taking, Intimidation, because that is the one social skill, or antisocial skill in this case, that you have available to you. If all else fails, if someone has tried to persuade or deceive their way through things and have come up short, well, now it might be your time to shine with Intimidation. And at certain tables, if you can present a convincing narrative reason why you're using your strength to potentially, crush something that a lesser character wouldn't be able to crush in one hand, to intimidate a character, your Dungeon Master might actually let you use strength and your proficiency bonus instead of charisma for your Intimidation. And again, your mileage may vary, but you can tell them Ryan sent you when you're having that conversation. I'm going to put nature and survival in a similar bucket. Skills I like and want in an exploration-heavy game. If you're out there in the wild, foraging for food, trying to identify plants, or again, you're more in beast mode, you want to have a lot of knowledge about animals, then okay, nature is your thing. If you are tracking those animals, or perhaps other quarry, or trying to find the path, or just, in a lot of wilderness survival sort of situations, survival is a good one. But for the sake of this tutorial, if you are unsure what to do, perception is kind of the best skill in the game, or let's say the most used skill in the game. You're going to be rolling a lot of perception checks. You're going to be happy to be good at it. So again, this is your character, build it the way that you would like. However, Intimidation and Perception are probably my 2 base recommendations. All right, now rage is our defining trait as a barbarian. This is our main currency, the kind of resource we are spending or conserving in combat. And I'm going to read this out. I know you can read, but you can imbue yourself with a primal power called capital R, Rage, a force that grants you extraordinary might and resilience. You can enter it as a bonus action if you aren't wearing heavy armor, which again, we never will because we don't have proficiency in it, and also because it will prevent us from raging, and that is our bread and butter. You can enter your rage the number of times shown for your barbarian level in the rage column of the Barbarian features table, which is on the PHP page. You can regain 1 expended use when you finish a short rest, and all uses when you finish a long rest. While active, your rage follows the rules below. Damage resistance, and this is the big one. You have resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, and those are the main physical types of damage in the game. If you are getting hit with a weapon or claws or teeth, you are talking about bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. And for most of the early levels, that's a lot, if not the majority of what you're going to be seeing. That precludes a whole basket of other kinds of damage in the game that are mostly coming from magical attacks or, maybe environmental effects and hazards. But again, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage is a lot of what's happening in combat. When you make an attack using strength with either a weapon or an unarmed strike and deal damage to the target, you gain a bonus to the damage that increases as you gain levels as a barbarian, as shown in the rage damage column of the Barbarian features table. So while raging, you're also pumping out extra damage. You also have advantage on strength checks and strength saving throws, which again don't come up a ton, but we might actually be doing more of them if we are leaning into that strategically, doing a lot of like shoving and grappling and that sort of thing. We can't concentrate or cast spells while raging. That's cool. We are smashing magic users, not being magic users. Duration, and this is the part where you want to focus in a little bit because this is going to be confusing for some folks. Rage lasts until the end of your next turn, and it ends early if you put on heavy armor or have the incapacitated condition, if something rings your bell enough that it makes you incapacitated. If your rage is still active on your next turn, you can extend it for another round by doing one of the following: making attacks against an enemy, and that's going to be the mainstay. If you're raging and you're in a fight, you want to hit people, narratively and mechanically. If you force an enemy to make a saving throw, and again, we're getting back into like grapple, shove, maybe some other abilities where we're not making an attack roll, the enemy is making a saving throw, a defensive maneuver to try to avoid the effect, the damage. But again, essentially, if we're going after enemies, we continue to rage. If we don't do one of those two things, we can take a bonus action to extend our rage, which we want to do. If we're still in combat, we want to keep our rage up because it is a precious resource. We don't want to waste it. There's going to be times where it makes sense to drop it in the middle of a fight. That's pretty few and far between. It lasts until the end of your turn, and you can maintain a rage for up to 10 minutes. Now, I'm going to say here, yes, you want to get value out of your rage. You really want to milk it. You want to milk it, but you don't want to cheese it. You don't want to get annoying and try to speed run the dungeon to keep your rage up, push things a little too far. 10-minute chunks of time in D&D are often an abstraction. That's about essentially the time it takes to explore a single room of a dungeon, in theory. The other big feature we're getting at level 1 as a barbarian is Unarmored Defense. While you aren't wearing any armor, your base armor class, or AC, equals 10, plus your dex and your constitution modifiers. You can use a shield and still gain this benefit. So for a while, at early levels, you're actually going to be better off not wearing armor until you can afford some of the higher end medium stuff, which gets up there. We're talking about 400, 450 gold off the top of my head, at the low end of what's going to be beneficial for you. early levels, unarmored is going to be better for you, and is also pretty freaking awesome to be the only person in the party charging into battle, not worried about armor. It really just like suits the class fantasy of the barbarian. The other choice that we're making right out of the gate here at first level, we get 2 forms of weapon mastery. This is going to be a big factor for a lot of martial classes, a lot of classes that are using weapons mostly up front, fighting on the front lines. I suggest you don't agonize too much over this because you can change it once per long rest. You can change one of these every time you take a long rest. So you wake up in the morning, you train with a different weapon, you can swap out one of these proficiencies. There's some cool stuff and some cool synergies and strategies based on these different weapon mastery options. For the sake of this, I'm going to tell you a great axe is a good weapon for a barbarian to have. It's a 2-handed weapon, so if we're wielding this, we can't use a shield, but it's doing a D12 damage die, which is pretty dope, arguably the best. Great sword, mathematically 2d6 is slightly better on a curve, but D12s are fun to roll, and this is a game, not a math problem. So I'm a big fan of the great axe. It's also what our barbarian in the picture is using, so right out of the gate, that's what I'm going to choose for our first weapon mastery. I can use a great axe without having weapon mastery in it, but I'm leaving something on the table because if I do have weapon mastery and I hit somebody with a great axe, I can use cleave. If you hit a creature with a melee attack roll using a great axe, you can make a melee attack roll with that great axe against a second creature within 5 feet of the first that is also within your reach. On a hit, the second creature takes the great axe's damage, d12, but don't add your ability modifier to that damage unless that modifier is negative. You can make this extra attack only once per turn. So if I chop a goblin with my great axe successfully and there's another goblin next to them, I get a shot to follow through to that next goblin as long as I can reach them, as long as they're within 5 feet of my first target. And if I hit, I'm not adding my strength modifier, but I am rolling full damage on the great axe, a d12. And if I'm raging, that rage bonus does get added to it. So pretty good one, a little situational. You can argue that, okay, how often are you running into a bunch of enemies at the same time? If you're a barbarian, that's literally what you're doing, running into a bunch of enemies at a time, at least early levels. So it's a good one. And again, we can change it tomorrow morning if we so choose. There are a lot of good options, honestly, and I'm the kind of player who gets bored doing the same thing game after game, night after night, let alone fight after fight. So I would probably be changing these as I experiment with different weapons, mess around. Eventually I might decide I want reach. I want to be messing around with pole arms, but I will say a trident is a pretty good option that a lot of people are going to overlook potentially. One, it's just cool. Two, it is thrown. This is something that we go reaching for if we can't hit them with a great axe. If they're about 20 feet away, if they're more than 20 feet away, rolling with disadvantage still might be worth it. But trident, one, is just cool. Two, has topple. If I hit a creature with a trident, I can force them to make a con save. And if they fail that constitution saving throw, they are knocked prone. So I knock them over. Now it takes half of their movement to stand up. That's a lot less speed, a lot less ground they can cover if they're trying to run away from me. So I can knock them down and make it much more likely that I get to them with my great axe the next time. And if I do that and they're still prone, now I have advantage on melee attacks against them. This also works with flying creatures. So something's flying 20 feet away, I can't hit it with my great axe because I can't get next to it. I can attempt to hit it with my trident, and if I'm successful and they fail their con save, which is going to be more and more likely depending on what I'm fighting, they are knocked prone, which in this case means knocked out of the air, potentially meaning they take damage from falling and hitting the ground. And hey, now they're on the ground, prone, I can get to them and go back into melee mode. So Trident, a pretty good option that I would put in your back pocket. What we're going to do today is a hand axe, just because that's what we're starting with. Again, a hand axe, I'm going to go reaching for to throw at enemies. It has the thrown property, so it's a ranged attack using my strength, not my dex, which I like as a barbarian because strength is my strong suit. If I hit a creature with a hand axe, and I have weapon mastery on the hand axe, I'm doing Vex. I deal damage to that creature, and that gives me advantage on my next attack roll against that creature before the end of my next turn. So if I'm running up, I can't quite get into great axe range, I can throw a hand axe at him. If I hit him, I don't know, in my imagination, it sticks or it damages them enough that it weakens their resolve, creates an opening for me, so I have advantage on my next attack roll, ideally with my great axe, but maybe it's another hand axe coming their way. Now, this page is also showing us all of the awesome stuff we're going to get as we level up as a barbarian. Later in this video, we're going to level up to level 2, and we'll talk about those things. At the very end, we'll talk about level 3, where your subclass comes online. But for the sake of all of my new friends out there, I am going to point out that most campaigns go about to level 5 on average, if they last that long. If you're out there on the internet, you found this video, odds are you're looking at other character building advice out there. Inevitably, if you go far enough, you're going to find some internet forum debate where people are arguing about, capstone abilities that come online at level 20, whether it's worth taking a 3-level fighter dip and settling for the level 17 ability. And I'm here to tell you that you're probably never going to get there. I'm sorry. Most campaigns that go the long run, you're talking about level 10, level 15, and that's at least a year away, the way most people play this game. So you don't want to be making sacrifices early on because of some future goal you are potentially never going to reach. This isn't the marshmallow test. This is a game for fun, to blow off steam. So you want right out of the gate to be having a good time, making decisions based on things you're going to enjoy playing in the moment. And I wouldn't look past level 5 as far as your character career considerations go. Is it worth having a decent idea what kind of subclass you're leaning towards, because that informs your character, the backstory even? Sure, yeah, absolutely. But if you have your heart set on a 7th level ability, you're going to be disappointed for the 6th, 7 months it takes to get there. And when the dungeon master moves, or they have a baby, or they switch jobs, and people's schedules change, or they get bored and just decide they're going to start a new campaign, and you never reach level 7, you're going to have a bad time. So don't get too far ahead of yourself. All right, next page, that brings us to background. Now, our background you can think of as what was your character doing before they became an adventurer. And this actually informs a lot of what our character is like, more so than ever, which I, for one, am pretty happy about. I think your career is going to shape your skills and abilities to a large degree more than your species. We can argue about that all day, and that can get you into some weird territory very quickly, especially online where there's no tone. Come at me in the comments. But if you were a farmer for 20 years, 200 years, depending on your species longevity, you're going to have a different set of experiences and skills than someone who was a criminal or an acolyte. And that's going to be more informative of how you operate in the world than, your species. So I think ultimately I'm going to go with farmer for this build. I'm into a very durable concept this time around. I want to set you up, new player, with a ton of hit points, so it's very hard for you to die, which is a common problem out there for adventurers. But first I'm going to point out soldier is also a good option here. Also, custom backgrounds are a thing. Talk to your dungeon master. Most tables are going to allow you to make your own, to suit your own backstory, to not get pigeonholed into one choice that might make some, compromises with the idea of the character that you're going for. Savage Attacker is a very nice thing for a barbarian to have. It makes sense as a soldier. Honestly, I can imagine a lot of barbarians where a soldier archetype fits quite nicely. Savage Attacker is a good origin feat that's going to buff our damage output quite a bit, especially at early levels, we'll feel it. But I kind of like the contrast of a little more peaceful farmer vibe going into things. It ties into the idea of like intelligence is going to be our dump stat. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but intelligence is not necessarily smarts, it's education. I like coming in with a sheltered character, especially one that can throw down, that you can't kill, and can cleave you in half with a great axe, being a little more down home country, simplified, kindly even, and we grew up close to the land, right? That's our vibe. Something happened, now we're adventuring out in the world. The ability scores that procs, strength, constitution, and wisdom. We're not going to do wisdom this time around, but strength and constitution are the main two things I'm concerned about, and tough is the feat that we get when we're a farmer. So let's look at tough for 1 second. Your hit point maximum increases by amount equal to twice your character level when you gain this feat. Whenever you gain a character level thereafter, your hit point maximum increases by an additional 2 hit points. So again, I'm going to back this up. We are going to be tough. We're going to be hard to take down. I actually didn't have to click that because it's right here. Ha 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 ha. That gives me animal handling and nature, which again, remember, those were 2 skills I was thinking about taking anyway, depending on what kind of vibe my character was going for. It makes sense for a farmer to be good at animal handling and nature. This is going to give me some flavorful moments in play, if not like super clutch moments in play, and I'm into that. Carpenter's tools, depending on your table and how much you lean into crafting and downtime and all of that. Carpenter's tools, it's cool. Plus, like, I can be whittling around the campfire every time we take a long rest. But here we go. Ability score increases. We got 3 points to distribute. I'm going to go +2 +1. I'm going to put +2 into strength. Remember, that is our main stat. The thing we're concerned about the most is strength. So I'm going to add 2 to my strength score. Oops, I did that wrong. I'm going to add 2 to my strength, and I'm adding 1 to constitution, which again is going to be the thing that determines our hit points. We're going to see that in a minute. I know I keep talking about these ability scores before we get there, but yeah, I want a lot of hit points because I want to be brave in combat. Now, the rest of this background page is going to be holding a lot of the details about our character, their backstory, their affiliations, and you can really dive deep to flesh out your character. And one way I'm particularly into doing that is by using the Game Master's Compendium of Explosive Creation, because I wrote the thing. Obviously, I'm a big fan of this. There are a lot more options in here. So again, if you're using custom backgrounds, this is a great resource. But here's our farmer. Anything that you choose out of the PHP is going to be in here. So out of the gate, I could roll a handful of dice, literally 1 of everything, to quickly build my character's temperament, backstory a little bit, generate a ton of ideas very quickly. Or I can look at this page and see if anything makes sense, jumps out at me. And out of the gate, for whatever reason, number 9 looks right for this farmer here. Defend the oft-forgotten simple folk. That is my drive, my dream, my aspiration, my motivation. I would be excited to play a character like that. Defend the oft-forgotten simple folk. That makes sense for a farmer, especially a farmer that can throw down now that they're out, swinging a great axe. And that's going to inform a lot of my decision making at the table. I know a lot about that character already. I know what they would do in certain situations. That clicks really nicely actually with that chaotic good style of play. Gonna roll a d12 here, and I got a 3. Violence claims the harvest, but not them. And I'm sorry, this is our call to adventure, our catalyst. Why are we not a farmer anymore? Why are we out here having an adventure? Because violence claimed the harvest, but not us. So, out of the gate, some bandits or marauders or, a tribe of evil humanoids came and burned down our town. And now, maybe we're out there for revenge, or we're just out here scraping by surviving. But there's another way to take that. Violence claims the harvest. So again, clicking into that chaotic good side of things, maybe the powers that be, the government, came and levied a tax, essentially, came and claimed the harvest for themselves to feed the army, the institutionalized force of violence, which is out there fighting some war that I didn't even know what was going on. And here comes the government, and they take most of my hard-earned, the fruits of my labor. And now the barn's empty. I can't feed my family or myself or whatever. And so I'm out here living a different kind of life after that happened to me. D8's going to give us potential for character growth, a nice arc. It's good to have a character that has room to grow and develop. Characters changing over time is interesting. So, out of the gate, wide-eyed bumpkin to worldly sophisticate is a pretty fun, potentially funny way to go. I actually got a 3 on the D8, reluctant to leave home to wanderlust, which I like the idea of, we didn't want to leave home. We were forced to leave home. We don't want to make the dungeon master drag us along on an adventure. We want to buy into the central premise of whatever the plot hook is. We don't want to sit in the tavern all night. We want to get out there doing it. But our character can be a little mumbly grumbly about it, could be a little reluctant to get out there. And slowly over time, as they adventure, as they see new things, have new experiences, they go from being a country mouse to a city mouse to a dungeon rat. The second column here is going to require a little more dungeon master buy-in. We're talking about groups and NPCs that maybe we have a connection with. It's always nice to be like, hey, I know somebody who might be able to help us, who might know something. And then the D10 is going to give us potentially a magic item or a little trinket or something. I got the trusty spade before. That grants the ability to burrow at 1/4 walking speed. Doesn't work on stone. That feels right for a farmer. That also feels interesting for a stone giant. Ancestry, we'll get to that in 1 second. So yeah, maybe I approach my dungeon master and say, hey, there's this magic shovel out there that my characters heard stories about. It'd be cool if they could find it, and maybe that can be dangled like a carrot in front of our character, and the dungeon master can use it to signal hey, come over here, there's story for you. Or if they're super cool, hey, here's a shovel. Don't sleep on burrowing speed. That could actually be super useful. We could also probably show up to most tables and say, hey, I have number 1 here, a locket containing the loamy soil from the fields of my homeland. And that's just a nice little flavorful trinket. Again, I can take it out around the campfire and kind of look at it. Maybe it's gravel, right? If I'm a Goliath stone giant. Ancestry. And it's just a nice little character moment that could maybe tee up some conversations with the other PCs, or just help me ground myself in what kind of character I'm rolling. There's a whole other page to this, and now this is definitely 100% the Dungeon Master's purview 99% of the time. But hey, maybe you could send this to him and be like, hey, here's a bunch of antagonistic factions and rivals and enemies, evocative locations, thematic monsters, and plot hooks that fit quite nicely and tie in to the kind of character I'm making, so it feels, whatever the adventure you're running, my character feels intimately integrated into all of this. It just makes for a more fun game night and just much cooler story. At least in my opinion. You can find a link to the Game Master's Compendium in print and PDF down below in the description. All right, next tab, number 3, our third stop is a species. I'm going to turn off legacy content. I already did it, but they're making me do it again. This is where we can talk about what we're using. Right now, this is a pretty fresh account where it's only giving me access to the free rules and the Players Handbook from 2024 that I purchased. Regardless, we're working out of the core rules and we are going Goliath. Again, we are building the character on the tin who looks quite a bit like that, actually. I would interpret her as probably a stone giant Goliath as well. So Goliaths are giant kin, are distant descendants of giants, which is pretty cool. Our speed is 35 feet, which is a bigger stride than just about any other player character out there from the jump. At least baseline, most people are bringing 30 feet to the table. We are covering a little more ground per turn than most others. Giant ancestry is what kind of giant is in our blood. And I will say, stone giant is where we're going today. But there's a lot of cool options here. Hills Tumble. When you hit a large or smaller creature with an attack roll and deal damage to it, you can give that target the prone condition. Again, I'm building myself a lot of ways to knock things over. That gives me advantage on attack rolls. Could be useful. Well, we're going to take Stone's Endurance for the Stone Giant. When you take damage, you can take a reaction to roll 1d12, the best die. Add your Constitution modifier to that number rolled and reduce the damage by that total. So once per turn, using our reaction, or we might want to use our reaction for other things. We're spending that resource, but we can use a reaction to reduce the damage coming into us by our Constitution modifier, which we are trying to pump up as high as we can get it, and a d12. So potentially out of the gate, we might say 15 hit points of damage gone once per round, making us much more survivable, while we already are pretty darn survivable. Starting at character level 5, I know I said don't get too far ahead of yourself, but at level 5, you can change your size to large as a bonus action if you're in a space that can handle that. And that lasts for 10 minutes, which is pretty cool. Has some mechanical benefits, also has some cool story benefits. You can just Mario, mushroom upgrade. Boop. That starts at level 5. But from the jump, we have powerful build. Advantage on any ability check you make to end the grappled condition. Can't hold me. Again, there's strategies, there's types of barbarians that we could build today or in the future where grappling is a big thing. And sometimes you grapple enough creatures, maybe they start trying to grapple you as well. Put you into holds. So yeah, we are taking our Goliath. We're going to come down here and we are going to formalize our stone giant selection. And the other thing our species is giving us here is languages. Now, everybody's got common out of the gate. That is the language that most things are speaking. That's the language you're speaking in-game, in character, by default. We get 2 more. So, giants seems to be the obvious selection for a species, a race, descended from giants. Maybe there's still some cultural touchstones. Just because you have Irish blood doesn't mean you speak Irish, Gaelic. Just because you have something genetically doesn't mean you've gained some knowledge from it in real life and in D&D. But I'm choosing giant. And now we get to a more interesting consideration. Do I sit down with my dungeon master and be like, hey, what are the odds I'm going to talk to a dragon in this campaign? Right? And they might be like, I'm not going to tell you that. Cool. Be surprised. But they might say, you know what? Yeah, Ryan, if you take Draconic, you might not be using it too much this time out. Alternatively, it could also turn to the other players at the table. Let's say someone's bringing a gnome to the game. And me and her buddy up, and I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I love the idea that like our characters are friends. Maybe I didn't grow up with other stone giants. Maybe I'm adopted, right? Maybe I grew up on a gnomish farm, right? I mean, that just filled my head with all sorts of awesome imagery. And now, 1, my character is much more interesting and cool. 2, I and this other player at the table have a language in common that our characters can speak, that maybe the other player characters don't speak, maybe the other enemies and NPCs don't speak, can't understand, and we could transfer information to each other without others comprehending it if they even overhear. And again, you can make an argument for dwarvish or halfling or goblin or orc or whatever, but I really like the idea of this extra large creature in the company of a bunch of gnomes. I also just like gnomes. Oh, hey, real quick, I made a mistake. I did the right thing and said the wrong thing and confused myself. This can all go a lot smoother and easier if you're not describing what you're doing as you're doing it. I am putting my +1 in strength and my +2 in constitution here, and you might want to do the same, and I'm going to show you why on this next tab. All right, ability scores. This is kind of our character's DNA. This used to be where you would start. And if you're going to roll manual, if you're going to roll for stats, you probably want to determine your ability scores first, because that really determines what kind of character you're going to enjoy playing. If you roll terribly for strength and constitution, you don't want to make a barbarian. But I think most tables these days aren't rolling for stats. It's fun. I've done it. It's old school. It's cool. It can help you discover a character. But if you have a very good idea of what kind of character you want to play, it's probably going to lead to disappointment. There's ways around it, a million customized house rules, whatever. I recommend, especially to new players, standard array. If you're a little more experienced, or you're the type who likes to tinker around during character creation, and I am, point buy is a great option that keeps things pretty balanced. I mean, we can min-max things to a degree, but I recommend starting with the standard array distribution of numbers. Standard array is giving us a set of scores. We can get to standard array from point buy, so we can start with the standard array instead of starting with all 8s the way point buy does, and save ourselves a lot of time. That's just a little pro tip. I recommend beginners start with standard array. It makes sure that things are balanced around the table. If one character is exceptionally good or exceptionally bad compared to the other characters at the table, it's going to impact the fun. It's going to make less enjoyment for everybody at the table over time. Even if you are that character who is like head and shoulders above everybody else, that gets old pretty quick. We all want to be on the same team at the same level, more or less, starting out. So strength is our primary ability score as a barbarian. So we're putting our 15 into strength. Our next stat is going to be constitution. There's arguments to be made that maybe we want to go dex, but I like con here, especially for this character build where my goal is to get us a ton of hit points, a ton of survivability here. And you can see it's populating down here. My total score in strength is a 16, not a 15, because that +1 from farmer that we just ran over and changed because I realized it was wrong. Same thing for constitution. We're sitting on a 16 because we're getting a +2 from farmer. And now the modifier is what actually matters here. I know this is confusing, stick with me. The total score, or ability score, is determining this number, and then we kind of forget about it. The +3 is what we're going to be adding to attack rolls, to damage, to certain skills. It's pretty rare that the game itself is going to be interacting with our ability score, other than when we're in here adding to them or changing our ability scores. So next, I'm going to put my 13 in dexterity. Dexterity is determining my armor class, among other things. My initiative score. Dexterity arguably is not the most important, but the most used skill in the game. Dexterity saving throws are important. There's a lot of reasons, whatever your character class is, you want a pretty good dexterity. And you can see we've taken priority on the physical skills and kind of left the softer mental skills for last here. And that's okay, cool. We're making choices. What is your worst stat is actually an interesting question, and it's fun to be bad at things. You might not hear that from a lot of other character build tutorials out there, but your dump stat can tell you just as much about your character, maybe even more than your character is. Hey, I have a barbarian. Cool. I know you're strong. I don't know what you're bad at necessarily. Intelligence is kind of the classic answer. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean we're dumb. You can play it that way, but it doesn't mean we're dumb. It means we're like uneducated, undereducated. We are sheltered, especially in the context of this world we're exploring, or, you know, history and science and religion. You know, we're pretty good at some, what do we take? Animal handling and nature, but we grew up on a farm surrounded by gnomes. You know, maybe we have different ideas or no idea what's going on. And that can be cool. One, because it can tee up some real comedic gold. But two, it allows us to be curious about the world around us. We don't know things. We have to go out there and ask questions of our other player characters adventuring with us, or NPCs, potentially even the enemies. So that can be interesting. I'm going to put my 12 in wisdom. Again, because perception is important. This is like situational awareness. There's other ways to interpret that, but wisdom is a pretty good one, and I feel like that's in line with my farmer character. And then charisma is 10, which is like baseline, average. So I'm not terrible at charisma. I'm just not good at it. Grew up on a farm. I'm not presenting, you know, super convincing arguments or lies. I'm not going to be the face of the party here. That's not my role as the barbarian. I'm good at what I'm good at, and I'm okay letting other characters shine at other moments, or taking my lumps to tell a fun story. So again, you can see that this is populating down here. My intelligence modifier -1, wisdom +1, and charisma is 0. We're only getting a +1 to dex, so I am going to be looking for opportunities to maybe improve this later through magic items, through feat. Again, dexterity is going to get my AC up, but right now my unarmored defense isn't looking so bad because I am the one class that gets to add their constitution. I'm adding this +3 as well as this +1 to my baseline AC. Pretty cool. Let's get some equipment and then we're ready to rock. Again, we said this already. I'm going to take the standard equipment. When I do that, it tells me what's in an explorer's pack, which is some pretty bog standard adventuring gear. Don't sleep on this stuff. You can do a lot of interesting stuff with flasks of oil and rope, and you may need torches, and it's good to just have the ability to camp out when you are camping out. Go camping without a bedroll or a water skin or a tinderbox, and then come back and talk to me about whether or not they're worth having. For the sake of argument, I mean, I'm proficient with carpenter's tools, so I kind of want to take this. And again, this is simpler. To take sickle might be a useful weapon. I can switch in and out weapon mastery with that. Healer's kit, it's nice to have. Shovel, we were already talking about our magic shovel. And 30 gold pieces with all that stuff, it's a pretty good get. Otherwise, yeah, I might take the 50 gold pieces and go shopping later. I'm saving up for that half plate and the breastplate before it, so gold is an interesting thing to have for me. So yeah, you know what? I talked myself into it. I'm going to take the 50 GP. Either way, it's not going to make or break you. I'm going to add the starting equipment, and I'm going to save you a world of trouble here by pointing out that we want to equip these weapons so that they show up on the character sheet. The same would be true for armor. If I were a character who wears the stuff, I have to check off that I'm using these things for them to show up. Same goes for the backpack. If I'm using encumbrance, then I'm a little more interested in the weight that's happening here. We can export this to PDF, which I am partial to. I like the old school character sheet printed out in front of me, and I can go play at a table with my friends. But we can also view the character sheet right here in DNDBeyond, and I know a lot of people just straight up play off of this by, you know, clicking buttons on here, make an attack roll. Ooh, 19 +5 to hit. We're doing a 24. At level 1, I don't care what I'm swinging at. I'm hitting it with a 24. One off from a crit makes me a little sad, but there you go. That's a nice omen for Tarakan here, our barbarian. You can see here, like I said, we're rocking a 14 in our armor class. Here's our skills, our proficiencies, passive perceptions, saving throws, all the good stuff. I'm not going to dive too deep into this. That's the topic for another video. I'm just going to highlight Hit points, 17. Might not sound like a lot to some of you more experienced folks out there, but at level 1, hard to beat. 17 HP. That's going to be twice as much as some of the player characters you're rolling out next to, I assure you. And that's before we talk about our rage halving the damage from most of the attacks. That's before we talk about reducing damage with a reaction once per round when we feel like it, when we think it's worth it to us. Pretty awesome. Level 1 character. Not so bad, right? Not so hard to do. In fact, I'm going to show you how to level up real quick because it is so easy. We're going to go back into the builder and I'm going to go from level 1 to level 2. And now a couple interesting things happen for our Barbarian here. We gain danger sense, an uncanny sense of when things aren't as they should be, giving you an edge when you dodge perils. You gain advantage on dexterity saving throws unless you have the incapacitated condition. Again, dexterity saving throws are a big one, are a frequent one. Getting out of the way when something's coming at you is something that's good to be good at. An advantage, if you don't know, is rolling 2 d20s and taking the higher result. And speaking of advantage, we are also getting reckless attack. This is going to be one of the core strategic decisions you are making as a barbarian during combat. Managing your rage, managing your reckless attack. Now, reckless attack, you have no resource to monitor here other than your HP, which again, we set ourselves up with a lot of. Reckless attack, you can throw aside all concern for defense to attack with increased ferocity. When you make your first attack roll on your turn, so before you roll the dice, you have to declare this. You can decide you're attacking relentlessly. Doing so gives you advantage on attack rolls using strength, which is what we're trying to do all of the time, until the start of our next turn. But attack rolls against us have advantage during that time. So we kind of like drop our defenses to just really lean in and attack, giving us advantage, making us way more likely to hit, twice as likely to crit. This can be a very useful thing, but the cost benefit here is that we are easier to hit ourselves. Our enemies have a higher percentage chance of hitting us, critting on us. But look, at level 2, we're rocking 29 HP. Pretty healthy. And if we're raging, we're reducing damage from most every physical attack. So pretty darn awesome. I hope you're enjoying this. Let me know down in the comments below if you have any basic level 1, level 2 questions. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, if you found this useful. Soon, we're going to talk about level 3, where our Barbarian subclass kicks in, and we really distinguish what kind of Barbarian we're playing. Things get really good and interesting. I hope I see you there. Until next time, thanks for watching, be kind, and have fun.